Everyone is on the internet nowadays, especially thanks to quarantine and social distancing. A lot of our activities are now dependent on the use of internet, and these trying times have only accentuated our dependency of this advanced communication technology. Information are being spread from one website to another through many forms: text, images, videos, you name them. The internet will spread them far and wide to as many people who can access them as possible. Unfortunately, one very significant part of that everyone demographic are the non-adult demographic. Adult by this very definition are people over the age of 18 and are perfectly allowed and even legal to engage in lascivious activities. So non-adults or minors are going to be anyone below the age of 18. But for this particular video, I'm not just talking about people who are under 18. I'm also talking about people who are over the age of 18 but acting like they're below the age of 10. I'm talking about people who really love to moral police all sorts of things in whatever fandoms that you're in right now. This particular phenomenon happens to pretty much a lot of fandoms that I've encountered on the internet, especially the most popular ones out there. One that is guaranteed to attract minors, and especially if those fandoms are dealing with stories that have characters that are still under the age of 18 but old enough to enter high school. Which, if you missed it, is the most popular setting for a lot of Japanese entertainment these days because it's the age where people do the wildest things and the dumbest of things. I too would like to wish a high school year where my spare time is spent on combating demons and failing miserably to hit on girls. So what have these moral police done to cause such ire among the fandom and worthy to be discussed in this particular video? Well, they have committed the most atrocious sin of accusing certain people in the fandom for being kid fiddlers. Why? Because they dare to either draw, post, or even just enjoying lustful and scandalous fan arts of the characters. Doing so practically gave you away as someone who is worthy of the attention of the actual police. After all, those dreadful kid fiddlers should never got their hands to fiddle these innocent kids, which is why the correct course of action is to call the actual police and arrest these people immediately. Except instead of calling the actual police, they just made some PSA to everyone in their social media. The PS in this context is less public service and more public slander. They make posts after posts telling people or artists that their art is morally vile and that they should delete them as soon as possible so that they do not encourage behavior towards kid fiddlers or something. Some of these minors even go to the extra mile of piling themselves up into one group and actively hunting down all sorts of fan arts or fan works that involve the teenage fictional characters. They group themselves together to face the raft of kid fiddlers instead of consulting actual adults. And this applies to pretty much every popular entertainment media that has high school characters. They're usually targeting the most popular shows with the most borderline characters, but it's not just limited to them. As long as they know about the fandom's existence, they will try to moral police it in some ways. Recently, they've been doing some moral policing on the Sailor Moon redraw challenge, especially the more scandalous redraws because Usagi is a teenager. They even attacked the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure fandom for pretty much the same crime, and they unironically attempt to call to action any sorts of suggestive or explicit fan arts involving someone like Jotaro because he's 1 year younger than the legal definition, or Giorno because he's 3 years younger than the legal definition. In result, many of these moral activities contribute into the naive and inexperienced artists or people deleting these works or censoring their works or, at the absolute worst, leaving social media in general. These moral busybodies are gonna bully these respective artists so that their works are removed from their social media timeline. They're doing that because they think that they're the moral police, protecting minors from being exposed to such a provocative and disrespectful piece of work. In reality, all they're doing is just some good old bullying and harassment, something that these people will call out and advocate against, except towards people that they deem to be immoral. And it's always the same thing happening in social media. Take it from someone who talk about their stupidity every week on streams. The pattern is always the same. Artists or certain people post certain things related to fictional characters. It can be either explicit or suggestive, doesn't matter. As long as it's about fictional characters of a certain fandom that are still on their high school years, there are always gonna be people commenting under it and talking about how sinful it is. These moral police are gonna attempt to brigade their followers to delete them and telling them that the art is contributing harm in the community. And by harm, I mean it violated the moral police's personal comfort, as in they don't like it. And from that point on, it can go either way. Either the person removes said work and the moral police celebrated the fact that they have power over people, or they don't remove said work and they have have nothing to celebrate except the fact that they are mentally older by 1 second. But either way, they're gonna always go to the first step again by finding the next person to bully or harass, the next person who dares to post these lascivious works on their timeline. The cycle repeats, and I've seen this happening practically every single week, and it never ever stops. But why would they do such a thing? How can they claim that certain works are sinful and destructive into a community? Why are they hiding on the thin veil that they are genuinely contributing into the betterment of the community or the fandom? The answers to those questions are simple, because they're all based on emotional gratification rather than any sorts of rationality or logic, because applying those two things in this instance would pretty much obliterate the foundation of their actions. What kind of emotional gratification? Well, as I said before, it's all about having that power, but it's also about affirming to their own moral standards. How amazing would it feel that you're capable of taking down people's posts on the internet? How amazing would it feel that you're doing the right thing, or at least you think you're doing the right thing? How amazing would it feel that you're contributing into the betterment of the community by taking a stance against those awful kid fiddlers? It all feels so good, and at least manage to distract these people from the otherwise empty and unfulfilling lives that they have. So now that we know their driving motivation, let's apply some rationality on the discussion, and for the sake of the argument, try to entertain what they're trying to say. These artists or people on the fandom posting either suggestive or explicit pictures of high school characters from a fictional media are either contributing to the culture of real-life kid fiddling or guilty of being real-life kid fiddlers themselves, and they put the two and two together because the aforementioned fictional characters that they posted in either suggestive or explicit situations are of high school age, as in minors. Therefore, having just a little bit of lustful desire towards them is a good signal that they should be arrested by the actual police. Oh, wait a second, not really. They're just asking them to delete the post. They're willing to let the kid fiddlers loose if those awful kid fiddlers just delete the posts. The moral arbiters of our society, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, the basic foundation of this hoopla is you like fictional teenager, you like real life teenager. In the process of constructing this rather stretchful argument, they miss one very crucial point. These characters are fictional. There's no denying the fact that these are fictional characters in a universe that do not exist within our reality because they are constructed by the minds of the creator of those fictional universe. Some of them wrote it when they're high. So explain to us how showing affection towards a fictional character would contribute into the affection of real-life human beings. Explain to us how the actions that we perform in a fictional context contribute into the real-life suffering of others, especially the suffering of real-life minors. Now, I am practically invoking the video game violence argument, except the video game violence is being replaced with suggestive or explicit works involving fictional characters who are not of age, but even that one has its own counter-argument. This argument is invalid because violent urges are not the same as reproductive urges. And I agree to some extent. It is true that our reproductive desires are pretty strong, and probably even more so than our violent desires. We wouldn't have all of those Hollywood scandals if it weren't for doofuses abusing their power and unable to control their urges. But just because they're different urges doesn't mean that they're uncontrollable urges. Just because some doofuses are unable to control their reproductive urges doesn't mean that we couldn't. If we cannot control our reproductive urges, we will be engaging ourselves in many sorts of reproductive activities every day, especially the non-consensual, illegal, and incredibly damaging ones towards the unwilling partner. We do not live in a culture where people are enacting reproductive activities to random strangers without their approval, or at least I don't believe it. Maybe if you're part of the progressive sphere who are being made paranoid by exaggerated statistics, but on average, guys just don't lose control and immediately attempt to hump on a nearby stranger. The average guys don't exactly have the same amount of power and influence as the 1% of the world, and can't really abuse the power to get away with aggressively cuddling people without their consent. Fortunately, not a lot of people can find a good team on this multiplayer session, and fortunately we are blessed with the knowledge that pretty much all of us are capable of satisfying our reproductive urges through the means of single-player campaigns with a certain media assistant, some of which might include the aforementioned works that these moral police are friending to censor. God forbid that people decide to unwind their reproductive urges in a healthy and harmless fashion session. And fortunately, since this is a single player campaign, no one is really harmed in the process, and you can even cheat your way through it without any sorts of guilt. That is, unless if we're talking about a media assistant where real children are involved, in which case we will force kick you into a multiplayer session where the FBI is in your opposing team and no one is willing to join yours. Point is, let people play single player in peace. Let people use their media assistant that involves these fictional characters. You should only be really worried for people who are genuinely trying to engage themselves with multiplayer sessions with real people and real minors. If those people exist within your fandom or your community, then it is definitely a cause of concern. But works that merely feature the aforementioned fictional characters should not be your concern. In fact, you should be glad that those exist because they would provide a great assistant for those who are playing the campaign. Be glad that there's a way for people to relieve their reproductive urges through this safe and harmless mean, in the same manner that video games do for our own violent or other urges. However, none of these arguments are enough to convince these moral police because it doesn't matter. And they're right, it doesn't matter. To their eyes, it doesn't. What matters is you people deleting their works and scrubbing them off of the internet's existence. What matters is you conforming to what they want, because that's all what this is about. It's about you giving them control over the things that you are doing. It's about them telling you that they have the power over you and you don't. Now, here's the thing. If you feel genuinely uncomfortable with these works, that is perfectly fine. You are entitled to feel uncomfortable. You are entitled to say that this fan art or fan fiction or fan work in general gross you out. You are not, however, entitled to brigade or encourage people to delete those artworks based on how it insulted your personal comfort. You are not entitled to encourage censorship simply because you feel mentally violated by witnessing or reading or listening to those things. At that point, you might as well try to censor the entire internet. Censorship will never ever work for your favor. You cut off one of these things, hundreds if not millions more will spawn. That's just the rule, the 34th rule if you will. Unfortunately, you will never understand that because encouraging censorship against these works is one of the ways for you to feel like you've done something amazing to this world. Encouraging censorship towards artworks that you deem morally horrendous, even though they merely violated your own personal comfort, makes you feel like you stand up towards something. It makes you feel like you're an amazing person who is fighting against all the evil in the world. Sad to say this, but you're not. You're not a prophet, you're not a saint, you're a human being who can make mistakes, and this is one of them.